But the government shutdown countdown is on.
Tonight, Americans bracing for a government shutdown.
A federal government shutdown in less than a day and a half appears unavoidable after a meeting between President Trump and congressional leaders from both sides of the aisle failed to produce a deal this afternoon.
Trump hosted Democrats in the White House for the first time this year about the government shutdown. Both sides said didn't make much progress. The chances of the government shutting down tomorrow at midnight are seemingly at an all-time high. And you want to know how I know that? It's because Trump just posted an AI video on his Truth Social falsifying the leaders of Congress and Senate on the Democratic side in the meeting, spouting off all this craziness with Hakeem Jeffries, the House Speaker, and a sombrero and a mustache. So that's where we're at right now. On my end, it's 9:30 p.m. on Monday night. Tomorrow at midnight, the government will shut down. And I'm going to answer, man, what's the history on shutdowns? What is this? What does that actually mean? And then, what are the implications for you and for me? And then I'll end like I've been trying to more and more, which is, man, if I were a leader right now, what would I be saying? Because right now, everything I'm hearing, I don't like. So here we go. Let's dive right in. History time. You know, I like this part. I'm gonna keep it quick, which is in U.S. history, there are really one or two presidents that Trump always pays homage to and clearly really looks up to. The first one, exactly 200 years before, Andrew Jackson. I could do a long list of all the similarities. They're the bull in the china shop who feels like an outsider. Andrew Jackson was less educated than the rest from the country and brought his posse, his cronies in with him from day one, to the point that they quite literally desecrated the White House because they were partying so hard. It's this hilarious, fascinating history. But of the things that had a really long-term negative effect, and there were a handful, it is that the meritocracy of U.S. government appointments completely eroded. Meaning he just appointed whoever the heck he wanted, whoever he liked in the moment, and it was oftentimes his friends who were super unqualified. And that kicked off this avalanche of whoever won the election, clean sweep of the incumbents and all the knowledge base and skills, and they just put their friends in charge. It took, let me think about this, Pendleton Civil Service Act, if Andrew Jackson was elected in 1824, so 46 years later, 1870, finally, on the back of really one of the main campaign promises being what's called civil service reform. The Pendleton Civil Service Act is passed. And then as well, the Anti-Deficiency Act, which really is that government can't fire staff without due process, without a reason. And on the anti-deficiency side, that the executive branch can't just issue funding willy-nilly without a budget or appropriations approved by Congress. So those are our two building blocks I'm going to start citing. But we're talking 150 years ago. Interestingly, that didn't get enacted in a way that could force a government shutdown until Ronald Reagan. It's under his AG, a guy named by the name Benjamin Civiletti, who required agencies to halt non-essential operations during funding lapses. So all of a sudden, government shutdown hadn't existed until 1980. Over the Reagan presidency, it happened 4 times. Clinton, 2 times. The second one is the one that lasted 21 days. At that point, it was the record. 800,000 workers were furloughed. Didn't happen during Bush. But then the big one, is in my my generation's maybe common vernacular memory, 2013, when Obama was looking to pass basically Obamacare, ACA. Ted Cruz threw an absolute hissy fit. It's a long, fascinating kind of history to dive deep on. But in short, 16-day shutdown. But here's where it's really easy to quantify. It cost the American taxpayer $24 billion in 16 days. Let's just start holding on to these numbers. Whoa, okay, that's historic. $24 billion. The next one, end of 2018, around Trump's border wall, the longest ever shutdown, 35 days, affecting 800,000 workers, in this case costing $11 billion. So that's what has occurred since 1981. But now let's do what actually happens in a government shutdown. I'm going to go really quick here. It's when a budget doesn't get passed. That's the simple way to put it. And really, the government categorizes workers around essential and non-essential. Essential are the ones that are responsible for protecting life and property. Think the military, CDC, air traffic controllers, border patrol, kind of the basic ones. But that leaves a whole lot of non-essential staff that you and I would consider like clerical, front office, analysts, researchers. Those are categories like the Department of Education, the EPA, the national parks. If you think of any museum run by the government, the Smithsonian, that's non-essential. You and I getting our passports issued, our IRS, actually doing the job it's supposed to. All of the grants that go to universities and researchers and startups like myself, those are all the non-essential things that get ground to a halt. And now the next one that's critical is, once again, in our case, 800,000 workers are at risk of furloughing, which means they don't get paid unless the government agrees to back pay them. But man, there's 1 million federal contractors that never get paid. They never get back paid at all. 1 million contractors. And now here's where you can kind of keep just realizing oh my gosh, this is a mess. And there's a reason these get really unpopular really quickly, which is each week that the government is shut down, it slices off gross domestic product, $25 trillion. Shaves off 0.5% every week. So man, 3 weeks, 5 weeks, like the one that happened last time Trump was in charge, that is a substantial amount of GDP. And then I think the other one that I'll kind of keep earmarking is the gain that then occurs, especially if a shutdown is more than 3 or 4 days. I would just call it the spin machine. It's both parties trying to pass the hot potato of responsibility back and forth. And in aggregate, in polling, both parties always suffer. So it's really a game of who can do less self-sabotage and try to convince Americans that it was the other person's fault. But no one really wins. The American taxpayer, most of all, does not win. So now let's get right to where are we today and how did we get here in 2025 since Trump's inauguration. It starts with a quick flashback, which is because Republicans control executive, Congress, Senate. The last time they had to pass a budget in March, they didn't even negotiate. They didn't even pick up the phone and try to win over Democrats. They just kind of forced down their neck. The exact kind of prerogative that they thought they had justification for. And in the 11th hour, Chuck Schumer, minority leader in Senate, he folded. And with it, his polling dropped precipitously. The Democratic Party just continued to hit all-time lows, which since U.S. parties have even been surveyed on their approval rating, the Democrats, for the last 6 months, have remained at all-time lows, hovering in the high 20%, which is abysmal. So the whole time, Schumer's just getting shellacked for signing on the Republican budget and has had a lot of time to, you could call it maybe growing a spine or just growing in resentment. So this time, when the House GOP passed what's called a clean CR, but I'll kind of skip some of those more nerdy definitions. But once again, it was no concessions. No even baseline interest in including Democrats. This time, Schumer and Hakeem Jeffries said, we aren't doing this again. The real issue at play that Democrats are trying to double down on is that there's few things they've been able to message well more than preserving Americans' health care. And right now, the Republican budget strips 15 million Americans of healthcare. It's through a couple different devices, what you and I think of ACA or Obamacare. There is a series of subsidies that Republicans are not going to extend, not going to continue, as well as a series of Medicaid reversals. And it just, the bottom line is a lot of it all circles back to healthcare. And that is the issue that they're trying to rally around and say, hey, we're going to fight. We're going to see if we can revive some amount of trust in our party's brand by sticking up for the working man and woman and making sure they don't lose healthcare. And now, and this is where we're starting to get into the tit for tat territory of how the Republicans respond. Man, I listened to the J.D. Vance clip Sunday morning. I was like, wait, what? How does that make sense? He started it, I think. And now I've seen Trump post it, Mike Johnson, a couple key Republican senators, is that Republicans are saying, we will not fund illegal immigrants' healthcare, which is like, when I heard that, I was like, wait, what? I've read some of the core policy statements, and at a baseline, illegal immigrants don't get Medicare and Medicaid, SNAP, the Supplemental Nutritional Assistance Program. They don't get any of those programs, or the exact thing being those Obamacare subsidies. They can't even qualify for Obamacare. So I was like, wait, what are you talking about? So then I found one Republican that cited a little more specifically that there is a small clause out of the 15 million people that will lose healthcare, this little category called lawful non-citizens, which from all my ability to research, it is legal refugees who went through due process, got the appropriate visas, and are here legally, but aren't citizens. But how the U.S. has always done it is that those folks do get the core benefits that other Americans do. Because, hey, we chose to bring them in here from the crises that they were fleeing around the globe. Let's take care of them. That's my only, if somebody has a better read on what they're talking about, I welcome it. I will put it in the comments. But that's right where we are as of Monday at 9:30 p.m. is that they met. Neither side made an ounce of progress. And now all the kind of statisticians and analysts say that we are at a north of 95% chance of shutdown tomorrow at midnight. Shutdown. Where typically I'd be worried. I'm like, oh, geez, I got a flight to catch soon. Like, whenever the government shuts down, all the air travel slows. Like, there's just all these nasty things. Taxes are coming up, like, for corporations. But then my mind went back and I started digging. I was like, wait a second. Do I remember correctly that there's this individual by the name of Russ Voigt who, in Project 2025, effectively authored the plan for government shutdowns? And then, yes, while Trump said he had never read Project 2025 and none of the authors would take any part in like formal cabinet or executive positions, Russ Voigt is in charge of the OMB, which effectively governs the shutdown. So it's like, okay, there's literally the person who authored the text who's now in charge of the shutdown. I got to go reread what he wrote because there's clearly a game plan here. And shortly thereafter, I started seeing the first posts from Republicans citing that exact game plan, which is, I'm diving right in all other government shutdowns, all employees furlough and come back automatically. But if you remember how I started with the Pendleton Civil Service Act, which is protecting due process before firing, there is a way there's this like crazy little loophole 150 years later that if you reclassify those staff as at will via Schedule F, you can fire along partisan lines, meaning Republicans can fire either primarily Democratic, like agencies that have really high Democratic approval ratings. Civil Rights Office, the Environmental Protection Agency, the Education Department. They can fire writ large in those departments or other key positions that are known to be Democratic leaders. So all of a sudden, Russ Vought started threatening online that the government is preparing to permanently, reduction in force, a RIF, 300,000 positions across top agencies in a way that really surgically weakens agencies whose specialty is enforcing and regulating core protective measures for you and me around the environment, around civil service, civil rights, around just basic funding that's equitable in education. It's like really spooky stuff to especially broadcast publicly as like maybe a threat, but not an empty threat. And then you just kind of keep layering on that this comes on the heels of another recent Supreme Court ruling that is allowing Trump to, there's words like impoundment or rescission, to revoke funding that both chambers of Congress approved. That is in defiance of the Anti-Deficiency Act. It's in defiance of a couple key acts that have always been considered status quo in government. But it's more tailwind allowing Russ Vought to fire whoever the heck he wants without any repercussions. For me, that always just clicks into, call it retribution, call it the dismantling of core constitutional structures and frameworks in a way that I'm quick to give Republicans my endorsement on things that I would consider pro-innovation, pro-economic growth, pro-you and me achieving the American dream. Thoughtful deregulation, I'm a fan of. If it helps spur growth, yes. Like I'm quick to call that out. But for me, the red line every single time that not enough of my role models or voices that I follow online are just calling out like, hey, this should be a red line for us. Firing a huge portion of the government along party lines isn't American. It just isn't. And it comes on the heels of plenty of other acts of retribution. Just this week, it's Trump truthing that all of his political opponents should get indicted. And the first one was James Comey. And the next is Letitia James or Adam Schiff. Like he's calling out by name who he wants the DOJ to go after. That's the red line. That's not American. And for me, that's when you've got to speak up and say something. And this is me late at night on a Monday trying to speak up, trying to add my voice. But let me also add just these additional things that are like really core human or beckoning to our humanity, which is like, 15 million Americans, lawful Americans, not illegal aliens. That's a bold-faced lie. 15 million Americans losing healthcare. It's always the working class. It's always the folks that need it. It doesn't sit with me well. And then you just keep adding, like right now, if we're lucky, the shutdown will be less than 5 days. But if we're looking at another $20 to $30 billion of GDP just evaporated, that's another huge issue. There's plenty of signals showing that our economy is strong, but there's an equal number right now that I follow really closely that are showing weakness. And this isn't the time for these theatrics. It just isn't. And then you go back to, it took 46 years after Andrew Jackson was elected to finally enact the Pendleton Act and bring a meritocracy and a depoliticization to the federal government, which ended so much errant corruption and waste. It's eroding that legislation and tradition in a way that's real. So I think here's the first thing that I say is this is a red line and this isn't American. And the second one is I want both sides to call a spade a spade. I'd love to hear a Republican say this. I want it like it is. I was impressed when Ted Cruz called out the Jimmy Kimmel, like, really explicit threatenings of firing. Oh, yeah, man, you're Republican? That takes some courage. I'm impressed. I'd love to see a Republican do that right now. And in the same way, Democrats have a systematic messaging issue. I don't know Hakeem or Chuck Schumer personally. They might be really good at whipping the votes in Congress, but man, I see a party without a rudder. And I hope this is a juncture, because it's so clear that we're barreling towards government shutdown, that that Democrats take this moment to message well, to flood the airwaves in the same way that Trump does every day. And yes, just make the case. 15 million Americans losing healthcare. That's super simple. And when they're saying illegal aliens, that's a lie. There's no even proof in the counter. It's a lie. It's 15 million Americans, legal Americans, and a small portion of refugees that we should also feel a loyalty to because they came here legally. And in the same right, call out, hey, and our Constitution matters. The Pendleton Civil Service Act matters. Maybe it takes a history lesson, but it matters. And instead, there's so much low-hanging fruit for Democrats to cast an aspirational vision about the future beyond that. Around, hey, and actually, on this healthcare issue, we've got a vision for how we can, as a party, drive the agenda on not just creating more free stuff, but innovating in healthcare so that everyone has immediate healthcare in their pocket, in their phone, so that AI is driving a 50% cost reduction and making accessibility to doctors way simpler. Like, I'd love for that to be the vision. So it's not just one more defensive maneuver trying to slow down Trump, but it's talking about what Democrats are for, which I just haven't heard in years. I think this is an opportunity to grab the microphone and start proclaiming what Democrats are for and why they're the ones that are protecting some of our most American values and constitutional rights. Okay, it is on my end, 10 p.m. Oh, wow, which means East Coast, it's 1 a.m., which means we are less than a day from government shutdown. If you've made it this long listening, thank you. And yeah, I encourage you to, even if it's small, add your voice. Thank you for joining me and letting me try to get my voice out there around the values that I care about. And I believe are just so American. Thank you. And we'll see you next week.